Get your dirty little hands off that seat right now before I have you dragged off this plane." The words were sharp, loud, and vicious, spat without hesitation, without warning, without shame. The first-class cabin froze. The senior flight attendant stood over the two girls like a judge who had already decided the verdict. Her face was tight with disgust, eyes narrowed as if she were looking at something misplaced, something offensive. Her voice dropped into a sneer. "I don't know who lied to you," she said slowly, cruelly, "but this cabin is not for kids like you." A few passengers flinched. Someone gasped softly. Others stared straight ahead, pretending the overhead bins were suddenly fascinating. The girls remained seated. They were 12-year-old black twin sisters, Amani and Amara Cole, identical in height and posture, deep brown skin glowing softly under the cabin lights. Their hair was neatly braided, their clothes simple and modest. No designer labels, no visible wealth, just composure, stillness, control far beyond their age. That control infuriated her. The flight attendant, Linda Caraway, 52, white senior cabin crew wearing her authority like armor, let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, don't look at me like that," she scoffed. "I've seen this trick before. Sneaking into first class, hoping nobody notices. Happens every damn week." She leaned closer, lowering her voice, but not the venom. "Let me guess, you found these seats online? Or someone felt sorry for you?" Her eyes flicked over their skin. "Or did you just think rules don't apply to you people?" The silence grew unbearable. Amani lifted her eyes slowly. Her voice was calm. "These are our assigned seats." Linda's lips curled. "Oh, sweetheart," she said mockingly. "I've worked for this commercial airline longer than you've been alive. I decide who belongs here." She slapped the headrest hard enough to make it rattle. "This is first class, not a playground, not a charity project, and definitely not a social experiment." Amara inhaled quietly, steadying herself. Our boarding passes were scanned at the gate. Linda laughed louder this time, mean, theatrical. "Boarding passes can be stolen," she snapped. "And don't even start with me about passenger rights. You don't get to scream rights when you don't even understand responsibility." She straightened and raised her voice deliberately, ensuring the whole cabin heard. "Ladies and gentlemen, we may have an issue with unauthorized passengers occupying premium seating." The word unauthorized landed like a weapon. Phones appeared. Screens glowed. No one intervened. Linda turned back to the twins, eyes glittering with satisfaction. "You know what I hate most?" she said softly. "The attitude. Sitting there so calm, like you deserve this." She bent closer again. "You don't." Amani folded her hands in her lap. Her breathing was slow, measured. "We are not moving." That was it. Linda's face flushed crimson. "Oh, so now you're defiant?" she hissed. "Figures. No manners, no respect. Raised to think you can challenge authority." She pointed toward the aisle. "Stand up, now, or I call security and make an example out of you." A ripple of discomfort moved through the cabin. A man 2 rows back shifted in his seat. A woman bit her lip. Amara looked up, voice steady but clear. "We are following airline policy." Linda burst out laughing. "Policy?" she mocked. "That's rich. You can barely tie your shoes and you're quoting policy at me?" Her voice hardened. "You know what policy really says? It says I don't let suspicious situations escalate. And 2 black kids sitting alone in first class?" She shrugged. "That's suspicious." A hush fell. Heavy. Toxic. Amani felt the weight of it. The eyes, the judgment, the quiet approval of cruelty wrapped in silence. But she did not flinch. Instead, she spoke gently. "We know our rights." Linda's smile vanished. "Oh, I am so tired of this victim nonsense," she snapped. "Always playing innocent. Always acting offended when someone tells you the truth." She leaned in, whispering now, her words cutting. "You don't belong here. You never did. And no amount of pretending will change that." For a moment, it felt as if the air itself had stopped moving. Then Amani lowered her gaze, not in defeat, but in focus. She whispered, barely audible, her voice steady as stone. "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear?" Psalm 27:1. Her shoulders relaxed. Amara felt it too. The shift. The calm before something irreversible. Linda straightened, satisfied with herself. 10 seconds, she said coldly. Then I escalate this properly. She turned and marched toward the front of the aircraft, heels striking the floor with authority she believed was absolute. Behind her, the twins remained seated, silent, dignified, unbroken. What Linda didn't know, what no one in that cabin knew, was that the system she trusted so blindly had already begun to move, quietly, watching. If you have ever been insulted before you spoke, judged by your skin, or humiliated by someone who thought power made them untouchable, then what happens next with these two girls will leave you shaken. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with Dignity Voices to witness how quiet power dismantles cruelty, and privilege is about to meet resistance it never anticipated. The aircraft door was still open, but the cabin already felt sealed shut. Linda Carraway reached the forward galley and stopped abruptly, pressing the intercom mute button with unnecessary force. Her jaw was clenched, breath sharp through her nose. She glanced toward the cockpit, then back down the aisle, making sure the twins were still seated. They were. That fact gnawed at her. She turned to a junior attendant standing nearby, a woman barely in her 20s, eyes wide and uncertain. "Did you see that?" Linda hissed. The junior attendant nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am," Linda scoffed. Unbelievable. The nerve. She straightened her uniform, smoothing invisible wrinkles, then lowered her voice. "This is exactly how things get out of hand. You give people an inch, they take the whole cabin." The junior attendant hesitated. "Their boarding passes looked—" Linda cut her off with a sharp look. "I didn't ask for your opinion." She tapped her tablet, scrolling with aggressive flicks of her finger. The screen lagged for half a second. Linda frowned, then shook it off. Behind them, murmurs rippled through first class. A man in a gray suit leaned toward his wife. "This is uncomfortable," she whispered back. "Someone should say something." Neither of them moved. Amani watched the aisle with quiet focus. She noted the way Linda's shoulders squared when she spoke to other crew members, how her voice softened when addressing white passengers, how it hardened again when her eyes returned to the twins. Amara leaned slightly closer to her sister. "She's not stopping." "I know," Amani murmured. Across the aisle, a woman lowered her phone after recording, guilt flashing briefly across her face before she looked away. Silence settled again, heavy and complicit. Linda returned, posture rigid, authority sharpened like a blade. "All right," she announced loudly. "I've reviewed the situation." She stopped directly beside their seats, looming. According to airline policy, first-class seating is reserved for verified premium passengers. Until verification is complete, you will comply with crew instructions. Amara met her gaze. "We already complied at boarding." Linda's smile was thin. "No, you were allowed through. That doesn't mean you belong here." Amani felt the insult land again, deliberate and practiced. Linda gestured toward the aisle. "Stand up." "No," Amani replied calmly. A sharp intake of breath moved through the cabin. Linda's voice dropped. "Dangerous." "Excuse me?" "We are not required to leave our seats," Amani said. "Not without cause." Linda laughed softly, shaking her head. "You really think you can outsmart me?" She leaned in closer, her words venomous. "Let me make this very clear. I have the authority to remove disruptive passengers. And right now, your refusal is disruptive." Amara spoke, voice steady but firmer now. "We haven't raised our voices. We haven't broken any rules." Linda straightened, turning slightly so others could hear. "That's enough. I'm escalating this. She tapped her tablet again, harder this time. The screen froze. For a fraction of a second, uncertainty crossed her face. Then it vanished. She pressed the intercom. Captain, we have a situation in first class. 2 miners refusing crew instructions. A ripple of reaction passed through the passengers. Heads lifted, eyes sharpened. Amani felt the cabin's attention narrow onto them like a spotlight. Linda crossed her arms. You see, this didn't have to go this far. Amara swallowed but did not look away. Please, Linda continued, voice laced with mock concern. Don't make this worse for yourselves. Amani's tone remained even. We're not afraid. That statement, quiet and unwavering, seemed to unnerve Linda more than shouting ever could. Linda leaned closer again, lowering her voice so only the twins could hear. You should be, she whispered, because when this plane lands, people like me are believed. She straightened and smiled at the surrounding passengers. Thank you for your patience, folks. We're handling it. No one spoke. A man in the front row stared at his hands. A woman near the window closed her eyes. Briefly, as if wishing the moment away, the intercom crackled. Cabin crew, the captain's voice said, measured. Proceed with protocol. Linda's lips curved upward. You heard that, she said smugly. Protocol. She turned back to the twins. Final chance. Amani felt Amara's hand brush hers. Steady, grounding. She glanced briefly toward the back of the cabin, where their guardian sat silently, eyes fixed forward, unreadable. Then she looked back at Linda. We're staying. The word hung there. Linda's smile disappeared completely. So be it, she said coldly. She stepped back, lifting her chin, her voice ringing out with practiced authority. Ladies and gentlemen, due to non-compliance, we will be delaying departure. Groans erupted softly. Linda nodded, satisfied. Security will meet us shortly. The aircraft door remained open. Time stretched. Pressure mounted. Amani closed her eyes for half a second, breathing deeply. This was no longer about seats. It was about power, and power, she knew, always revealed itself under pressure. If you have ever watched injustice unfold while everyone stayed silent, then what happens next will make your heart race. Stay with Dignity Voices. Like, subscribe, and prepare yourself, where humiliation turns public and the cabin becomes a courtroom. The delay stretched from minutes into something heavier. The cabin lights dimmed slightly, as if the aircraft itself sensed the tension and lowered its voice. The open door at the front of the plane became a silent threat, an exit not for departure, but for removal. Linda Carraway stood rigid in the aisle, arms crossed, feet planted like a guard at a gate. Her expression was no longer irritated. It was satisfied. She had escalated. Now she intended to enjoy it. Security personnel had not yet arrived, but Linda acted as if they already stood behind her. She straightened her shoulders and addressed the cabin. Again, louder this time. For everyone's awareness, she announced, we are experiencing a delay due to uncooperative passengers refusing lawful crew instructions. The word lawful was deliberate. Several passengers groaned. One man muttered, unbelievable. Linda turned her head just enough to ensure the twins heard every syllable. This is exactly why procedures exist, she said sharply. When people don't follow rules, everyone suffers. Amani sat still, eyes forward. Amara felt her heartbeat press against her ribs but kept her posture straight. Linda leaned closer, voice dripping with false patience. You see what you're doing? She whispered. All these people delayed because you couldn't just accept your place. Amara spoke softly. We didn't cause this. Linda's eyes flashed. You absolutely did. She turned theatrically toward the front row. I've explained the situation to the captain. Security will verify. Identity and seating authorization. She paused, then added casually, if fraud is involved, that becomes a legal matter. The word fraud echoed. A woman near the aisle gasped quietly. A man across the cabin raised his phone again. Amani felt the cabin's mood shift, not toward justice, but toward spectacle. Linda tapped her tablet once more. This time it responded, loading a passenger manifest. She angled the screen toward herself, then frowned slightly. She murmured. Amani noticed. Linda masked it quickly, lifting her chin. Names don't prove entitlement, she said loudly. People lie. She turned back to the twins. Especially when they think nobody important is watching. Amara's jaw tightened. Linda raised her voice again. For the record, refusal to comply may result in removal from the aircraft and further action under airline conduct regulations. She let the implication hang. This wasn't about procedure anymore. This was punishment. A man 2 rows back finally spoke, hesitant. Excuse me, but Linda cut him off instantly. Sir, please remain seated. Crew is handling this. Her tone brooked no dissent. The man sank back, ashamed. Linda smiled faintly. That's what I thought. She turned her attention fully back to the twins, lowering her voice but not the cruelty. You know, she said, I've seen this before. Kids taught to think the system owes them something. No respect for order, no appreciation for what others worked for. She tilted her head. But systems always correct themselves. Amani lifted her gaze slowly. Sometimes systems fail. The statement was quiet, but it landed. Linda stiffened. Excuse me? Amani met her eyes. When abuse is allowed, when no one intervenes. Linda laughed sharply. That's rich, talking about abuse when you're the one disrupting a commercial flight. She straightened again, addressing the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, we are documenting this incident for legal accountability. The phrase sounded rehearsed, weaponized. Amani felt Amara's hand tremble slightly against hers. She squeezed it once, steady. Linda continued, her voice smooth now, almost triumphant. Let this be a lesson. Rules exist for a reason. Authority exists for a reason. And when those are challenged, consequences follow. She leaned in again, whispering harshly. You could have avoided all of this, but you chose to be difficult. The aircraft intercom crackled softly. Linda pressed it eagerly. Yes, Captain? Cabin crew, the captain said, cautious. Security is en route. Maintain calm. Linda smiled broadly. You hear that? She said to the twins. Security. Amara closed her eyes for a brief second, then opened them. Why are you doing this? She asked quietly. Linda's smile faded into something colder. Because someone has to keep order, she replied. And because if I don't, chaos wins. She straightened, voice rising again. And frankly, this airline has been too soft lately. The words slipped out before she could stop them. Too soft. Amani caught it immediately. Soft on what? On who? Linda continued, unaware she had revealed more than she intended. This kind of thing happens when companies are afraid to enforce standards, she said. That's how corporate negligence starts, letting things slide, looking the other way. She gestured toward the twins as if they were evidence. A murmur rippled through the cabin. Amani felt it. The shift, the subtle discomfort, the recognition that something about Linda's justification was wrong. Not just wrong, dangerous. Linda seemed to sense it too. Her voice sharpened again. This conversation is over, she snapped. You will remain silent until security arrives. She stepped back, arms crossed once more, assuming her stance of control. Time stretched again. The twins sat in the center of it, exposed, judged, recorded. Amani felt the weight of eyes, the pressure of expectation, the cruelty of public humiliation without physical touch. This was the valley. She inhaled slowly. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. Matthew 5:6. The word settled her. Linda shifted her weight, impatience creeping back in. Any moment now, she said smugly. The cabin door remained open. The aisle remained blocked. And something unseen, something far more powerful than Linda's authority, was already beginning to turn. If you've ever watched power humiliate the innocent while the crowd stayed quiet, then don't look away now. Subscribe and stay with Dignity Voices. And silence is about to become the most dangerous force in the cabin. Silence settled over the cabin like a held breath. After the spectacle, after the raised voices and the weaponized procedures, there was nothing left but waiting. No one spoke. No one moved. The open aircraft door remained fixed at the front, a bright wound of daylight cutting into the controlled dim of the first-class cabin. Time slowed, stretched thin, and every second magnified the weight of what had already happened. Amani felt the silence first, not as emptiness, but as pressure. It pressed against her ears, her chest, her thoughts. This was the moment after humiliation, when noise vanished and truth began to surface in its absence. Across the aisle, Linda Carraway stood rigid, arms crossed, jaw tight. Her earlier confidence had not disappeared, but it had shifted. There was impatience now, a faint edge of unease she could not fully suppress. Authority was only comfortable when it moved forward. When it stalled, it began to expose itself. Passengers avoided eye contact. Some stared at the floor. Others pretended to scroll through phones, though their screens had long gone dark. A few glanced toward the twins, then quickly away, as if shame itself were contagious. Amara noticed the change before Amani did. The room no longer leaned entirely in Linda's favor. The cruelty had gone too far. Even those who remained silent felt it. Amani inhaled slowly and let her shoulders drop. This was what her father had taught them. When power expects noise, give it stillness. Linda shifted her weight and cleared her throat. The sound echoed too loudly in the quiet. "Security should be here by now," she muttered, more to herself than anyone else. She checked her tablet again, tapping the screen with sharp, irritated motions. For a brief moment, the display lagged. A loading icon appeared, then vanished. Linda frowned. She tapped again. Nothing. Her fingers paused, hovering over the glass. She glanced toward the cockpit, then back down at the screen, masking her concern behind a practiced scowl. Amani watched carefully. This was the shift. Not the collapse, not yet. Just the first hairline fracture. Linda straightened and addressed the cabin once more, though her voice lacked its earlier sharpness. "We appreciate your continued patience," she said. "Delays are unfortunate, but necessary when safety is involved." No one responded. The silence answered her instead. Amani lifted her gaze and met Linda's eyes fully for the first time. She did not glare. She did not challenge. She simply looked. It was not a child's look. It was measured, observant, steady, a look that assessed rather than reacted. Linda faltered. For a fraction of a second, she felt it, the unsettling sensation of being evaluated instead of obeyed. "What are you looking at?" Linda snapped, too quickly. Amani's voice was quiet. "You." The single word landed harder than any insult. Linda's lips pressed together. "Lower your eyes when you're being addressed," she said sharply. Amani did not comply. Around them, something subtle shifted. The cabin seemed to lean inward, attention narrowing, as if drawn toward the stillness radiating from the twins. Amara felt it too, the strange reversal. They were no longer the ones on display. Linda was. Linda took a step back, then another, reclaiming space. "This delay is your fault," she said, her voice rising slightly. "And when security arrives, this will end exactly how it should." Amani tilted her head just enough to signal thought. "Is that what usually happens?" she asked softly. Linda scoffed. "Yes." "Even when procedures are misused?" Amani continued. Linda stiffened. "Procedures are never misused." Amani nodded once, as if noting the answer. The quiet stretched again. Linda checked her tablet once more. This time, a small notification appeared, gone almost as quickly as it arrived. Her breath hitched. Amara leaned slightly toward her sister. "She's nervous," Amani whispered back. She should be. Linda overheard the murmur and bristled. "That's enough whispering," she snapped. "This is not a game." Amani's voice remained calm. "Neither is accountability." The word hung there, heavy and deliberate. A few passengers exchanged glances. The man in the gray suit from earlier sat straighter, eyes narrowing thoughtfully. Linda laughed, but it sounded thin. "You don't get to lecture me about accountability," she said. "I follow protocol." "Following something doesn't mean understanding it," Amani replied. Linda opened her mouth, then closed it again. For the first time since the incident began, she did not have an immediate response. The cabin air felt charged now, humming beneath the quiet. Minutes passed. No security. No announcement. Linda's confidence began to leak away in small, visible ways. She checked the aisle repeatedly. She adjusted her uniform. She tapped her tablet again and again, growing more agitated each time it failed to respond as expected. Amani remained still, her gaze steady, her breathing slow. This was endurance, not passive, intentional. She remembered her father's voice, calm and precise. Power reveals itself when it is forced to wait. Linda finally broke. "Why are you so calm?" she demanded. Amani answered honestly, "Because this isn't the end." Linda laughed sharply, though fear flickered behind her eyes. "You think you know how this ends?" Amani met her gaze without blinking. Yes. The word was soft, certain. The cabin felt suddenly smaller. Something unseen moved beneath the surface, systems shifting, attention redirecting, invisible mechanisms beginning to align. Linda felt it instinctively. Her posture stiffened, defensive now rather than dominant. She turned toward the cockpit once more, her voice strained. "Captain, any update?" There was a pause before the reply. "Stand by," the captain said. "Stand by." The words landed like a warning. Amani closed her eyes briefly, grounding herself. "Be still, and know that I am God." When she opened them again, the silence no longer felt oppressive. It felt deliberate, like a held breath before impact. The silence did not break. It crystallized. After the captain's last words, "Stand by," the first-class cabin seemed to lock into place, as if time itself had paused to witness what came next. No footsteps approached. No announcements followed. The open aircraft door remained unmoving, a stark reminder that the flight was still grounded, still waiting. And waiting, Amani knew, was no longer in Linda Carraway's control. Linda stood rigid in the aisle, arms folded so tightly they pressed into her uniform. Her confidence had not vanished, but it had begun to decay from the inside. Authority, when unanswered, always did. She glanced down at her tablet again. This time, the screen did not load at all. Her fingers tapped harder, faster, nothing. A faint crease appeared between her brows. Across from her, Amani watched without expression. Not triumph, not satisfaction, simply observation. Amara felt the change ripple outward. Passengers were no longer pretending. Heads were raised now, eyes alert. The crowd had shifted from passive witnesses to quiet evaluators. Linda forced a smile and lifted her chin. "There appears to be a temporary systems delay," she announced, projecting calm she no longer felt. "Remain seated." No one responded. Amani spoke instead, her voice low but clear. "May I ask a question?" Linda snapped her head around. "No." Amani continued anyway. "Do you know why systems fail?" Linda scoffed. "Because people misuse them." "Sometimes," Amani replied. "Other times it's because they're being corrected." Linda laughed sharply, but it sounded hollow. "Corrected by who? You?" Amani did not answer immediately. She reached slowly into the small bag at her feet. The movement alone caused a visible stir. A few passengers straightened. Someone gasped softly. Linda's hand twitched toward her radio. "What are you doing?" Amani removed a slim black card holder and placed it gently on her tray table. She did not slide it forward. She did not display it theatrically. She simply let it rest there. "I'm giving you an opportunity," Amani said calmly, "to stop." Linda stared at the object, then back at Amani. "That means nothing." Amani nodded. "That's what you think." The tablet in Linda's hand suddenly chimed. A sharp, unfamiliar tone. Her breath caught. She looked down. The screen flickered, then filled, not with passenger data, but with a secure alert banner she had never seen before. Her fingers froze. Across the aisle, a man leaned forward. Another passenger whispered, "What is that?" Linda swallowed. "What did you do?" she demanded. Amani's voice remained steady. "I asked a system a question." Linda's hands trembled as she scrolled. Lines of encrypted text filled the display. A symbol blinked in the corner. Corporate, unmistakable. Her face drained of color. The intercom crackled. "Cabin crew," the captain's voice came through, no longer cautious, controlled, formal. "Do not proceed further with this situation." Linda's head snapped up. "Captain, I'm in the middle of—" "Stand down," the captain interrupted. "Immediately." The word hit the cabin like a shockwave. Linda froze. She had never been told to stand down mid-incident. "Captain," she said, forcing a laugh, "I'm handling a compliance issue." There was a pause. Then, "No, you are not." Linda's mouth opened, closed. Amani finally lifted the card holder and turned it so Linda could see. Not the passengers, just Linda. "This is your final warning," Amani said quietly. "The system is already watching." The words echoed, not loudly, but deeply. Linda stared at the card. Her eyes widened as recognition flickered, then terror. "No," she whispered. "That's not possible." Amara spoke for the first time in minutes, her voice calm but unmistakable. "Our father taught us never to announce power," she said. "Only responsibility." The captain spoke again, his tone unmistakably different now. "Cabin crew, please remain at your station. Executive compliance has assumed control." A murmur surged through the cabin. Executive compliance. Linda's tablet vibrated again. Another alert. Then another. Access icons vanished one by one. Her shoulders sagged. She looked around, suddenly aware of every eye watching her. Amani's gaze never left her face. "For there is nothing hidden that will not be disclosed, and nothing concealed that will not be brought to light." Luke 8:17. Linda's voice broke. "You set me up." Amani shook her head gently. "You revealed yourself." The intercom clicked once more. "Ms. Caraway," the captain said, reading carefully, "you are to cease all passenger interaction. Remain where you are." The use of her name sent a chill through the cabin. Linda looked down at her uniform as if seeing it for the first time. Not as armor, but as something flimsy. Amara leaned toward her sister. "It started." Amani nodded. The plane felt different now, not louder, clearer. The power had shifted, not with shouting, not with threats, but with truth. Linda stood alone in the aisle, stripped of certainty, surrounded by witnesses who now understood exactly what they were watching, and this time no one looked away. If you've ever waited for the moment when truth finally speaks, stay with Dignity Voices, like and subscribe, because justice doesn't always arrive with noise. But when it does arrive, it changes everything. The system is about to move with precision, speed, and no mercy. The plane still hadn't left the gate, but something more, powerful than motion had begun. It started as a sound most people didn't even recognize, an unfamiliar chime from Linda Caraway's tablet. Not the cheerful ding of a beverage request, not the gentle alert of a seat change. This one was clipped and clinical, like a lock turning somewhere deep inside a door you didn't know existed. Linda stared down at the screen. Her fingers hovered, then tapped. The display didn't respond the way it always had. The icons she relied on, crew incident reporting, internal messaging, authority override, were still there for a heartbeat, then slid away one by one as if someone were erasing her access in real time. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Across the first-class cabin, passengers leaned forward openly now. The earlier discomfort had sharpened into attention. People weren't recording anymore for drama. They were watching because they could feel something shifting, an invisible hand moving the pieces of a board that had never belonged to them. Amani stayed still. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She watched Linda the way you watch a storm pass over water, without fear, without celebration, simply aware that forces larger than personality were at work. Linda tried to steady her voice. "Captain," she called toward the cockpit. "I'm seeing a system glitch." No reply. That silence was different from the silence in the cabin. This was operational silence, measured, intentional. The kind of silence you hear right before protocol executes. The intercom clicked. "Cabin crew," the captain said, voice flatter now, formal enough to feel unfamiliar. "Executive compliance has assumed control of the incident. All passenger handling is suspended." Linda blinked, as if she'd misheard. "Executive... what?" "Compliance," the captain repeated. "You are to stand down. Stand down." The word struck Linda like a slap, not loud, but final. "I'm enforcing policy," she said quickly, the old authority rushing back in a desperate surge. "This is a safety and compliance issue." There was a pause. Then the captain again, slower now, like reading from a directive. "Ms. Carraway, your authority has been temporarily revoked, pending review." Revoked! Linda's eyes dropped to her tablet again, and there it was in stark lettering above her employee ID. Status, under review. A small red banner flashed beneath it. Access limited. Do not engage passengers. Her throat tightened. "This is a mistake." Amani spoke gently, almost like she was offering a door out of the moment. "You asked for protocol." Linda whipped her head toward her. "You did this." Amani's voice didn't change. "No, I asked a system to look at what you were already doing." Linda scoffed, but it sounded thin, like paper tearing. "You're a child." "A child with eyes," Amani replied, "and a system that keeps records." The tablet chimed again. Another alert. Then another. Linda's fingers shook as she scrolled, and the cabin caught glimpses of phrases that made people sit straighter. Prior complaints, pattern indicators, escalation history. Amara leaned toward her sister, whispering low, "They're pulling everything." Amani nodded once. "They always do when they finally decide to look." In the forward galley, a junior attendant had been hovering, unsure where to stand. Caught between loyalty to senior crew and the dawning realization that seniority wasn't protection anymore. She glanced at Linda, then at the cockpit door, then back at the twins as if trying to reconcile what she was witnessing with the world she'd been trained to accept. The intercom clicked again. "Miss Carraway," the captain said, "you will proceed to the forward galley and remain there. You are not to engage any passenger. Another crew member will cover your duties." Linda's jaw clenched. "I've worked for this airline for 23 years. "And this review will include those years," the captain replied, calm and merciless in its neutrality. The cabin went very quiet again. Not complicit quiet, observing quiet. The kind that makes a person feel exposed without anyone saying a word. Linda took one stiff step toward the galley, then stopped, turning her head slightly, as if searching for support among the passengers. But the faces she'd expected to be irritated at the twins were no longer aimed at them. They were aimed at her. A man in a gray suit lowered his phone completely and folded his hands. A woman by the window exhaled and stared at the seatbelt sign as if she'd been holding her breath for 10 minutes. Someone else whispered, barely audible, "So she was lying." Linda's eyes flashed with shame and anger. She turned away and walked into the forward galley. The curtain swayed once behind her like a closing sentence. The junior attendant remained in place, frozen. The captain's voice returned, slightly softer, directed at the whole crew now. Cabin crew, resume standard operations. We are preparing for departure. A beat passed. Then the sound of movement. Not frantic movement, controlled movement. A different attendant stepped forward to reset the energy in the cabin. A professional smile that didn't pretend nothing happened, but also didn't amplify it. The kind of calm that signals the system is back in alignment. Amani felt the cabin's temperature change. Not physically, emotionally. The air seemed less poisonous. The spotlight had shifted away from the twins, and with it, some of the pressure dissolved. The captain came on once more, addressing passengers directly now. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We apologize for the delay. A crew compliance matter has been resolved. We will be departing shortly. Resolved. People absorbed that word in different ways. Some felt relief. Others felt a delayed wave of guilt. A few looked at the twins with something close to admiration. Quiet, respectful, and slightly stunned. A man across the aisle leaned toward Amani and spoke carefully, as if afraid to make the wrong sound. "I'm sorry that happened." Amani nodded politely. "Thank you." That was all. No speech, no lesson delivered to strangers. Quiet power didn't lecture. It simply endured, and then allowed truth to do what it always does when it's finally given room: correct the environment. The forward aircraft door began to close. Daylight narrowed to a thin strip, then disappeared with a soft mechanical hush that sounded almost like closure. The cabin lights adjusted. The plane hummed. A subtle vibration moved underfoot as systems transitioned from gate mode to departure readiness. The flight attendants resumed their positions, their faces carefully neutral, professional, controlled, and clearly aware that something irreversible had happened behind the curtain. Somewhere far beyond the cabin, the real machinery of consequences was already moving. An automated compliance report triggered by an executive-level flag. Legal counsel notified. HR escalation routed. A regional operations director alerted. Union oversight pinged. A chain of timestamps forming a narrative that could not be argued with because it was built from Linda's own recorded behavior. Amani didn't need to see those emails. She could almost feel them. The invisible gears. The unstoppable sequence. The plane pushed back from the gate. As the cabin gently rocked, a few passengers looked around as if waking from a strange dream. But it wasn't a dream. It was a lesson about power, about how the loudest person in the room isn't always the one who owns the outcome. Amara leaned in close to her sister. She thought she was untouchable. Amani's voice stayed low. "That's what privilege tells people." "And what do we do?" Amara asked. Amani looked forward, calm and certain. "We let the system be honest." The engines deepened. Taxi began. Outside the window, the runway lights stretched like a path, cold and clean. And behind the galley curtain, Linda Carraway stood in a space that suddenly felt much smaller than it used to. A space where her uniform no longer sounded like authority, only fabric. The plane turned toward the runway. The cabin fell into a new kind of quiet, one that wasn't fear, but awareness. Because everyone could sense it now. The correction wasn't finished. It had only begun. The wheels touched down with a muted thud that traveled through the cabin like a closing gavel. For a second, nothing happened. Just the steady deceleration, the soft rattle of overhead bins, the collective exhale of passengers pretending they hadn't spent the last hour watching a public dismantling of cruelty. Outside the window, runway lights slipped past in clean lines. Inside, the atmosphere had changed so completely it felt like a different flight than the one that had been delayed at the gate. Amani and Amara remained still as the plane rolled toward the terminal. They didn't whisper now. They didn't need to. The system had already shifted, and systems, once they decide, do not drift back out of pity. Up front, behind the galley curtain, Linda Carraway made no sound. But her silence wasn't power. It was containment. The kind of silence that happens when a person realizes they are no longer the narrator of the story they started. The captain's voice came over the intercom, calm and clipped. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to New York. Please remain seated until the seatbelt sign is turned off." A pause, then slightly different, more formal. "We appreciate your patience today. Our airline is committed to safety, dignity, and respectful service." Respectful service. A few passengers glanced around at each other, almost startled by the words, because everyone knew who they were for. The plane turned into the gate. The engines lowered into a hum. The seatbelt sign stayed on. That was unusual. A flight attendant moved down the aisle with careful control. No cart, no announcements, just presence. The kind of presence you carry when you know executives are waiting outside the aircraft door. Amani looked toward the front and saw it before anyone else did. Through the tiny forward window, silhouettes. Multiple. Suits. Security. A woman holding a tablet. A man with an earpiece. A cluster that didn't belong to ordinary arrivals. Amara's eyes widened slightly. "They're here." Amani nodded once. "They always arrive at the end." The cabin door opened, and the first person who stepped onto the aircraft wasn't a gate agent. It was a tall black woman in a tailored navy suit, hair pulled back, face composed like carved stone. Behind her, two airline security officers stood shoulder to shoulder, and behind them, another executive with a badge clipped to his belt that read, "Executive Compliance." The woman's gaze swept the cabin quickly, not searching for drama, but locating truth. She walked forward with quiet authority, then stopped at the galley curtain. "Ms. Carraway?" she said. Linda didn't answer immediately. The executive's tone didn't change. "Ms. Carraway, please step forward." The curtain moved. Linda emerged slowly, posture stiff, eyes guarded. She tried to summon her old authority, chin lifted, mouth set, but it didn't fit anymore. In the presence of real structural power, the uniform looked like fabric. The executive didn't raise her voice. She didn't insult. She didn't gloat. She simply held out her hand. "Your device," she said. Linda hesitated. "I need to file my—" "You will not file anything," the executive replied calmly. "You will comply." A beat. Linda surrendered the tablet. One of the security officers extended a small pouch. The device disappeared inside it like evidence being sealed. Passengers watched, stunned. Several lowered their phones, suddenly aware that this wasn't entertainment. This was consequence. The executive turned slightly and addressed the cabin with measured clarity. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We are reviewing a crew compliance matter. We ask that you remain seated while we complete a brief procedure." Her words carried the weight of control without hostility. It wasn't theater, it was procedure. Then she looked directly at Amani and Amara, not with curiosity, with respect. "Mrs. Cole," she said softly, just loud enough for the first rows to hear. "Thank you for your patience. May we speak with you briefly after deplaning?" A ripple went through the cabin like wind through tall grass. She knows their names. A man near the aisle blinked hard. A woman's hand flew to her mouth. Someone whispered, "Who are they?" Amani nodded politely. "Yes?" Linda's face tightened. For the first time, the reality struck her visibly. Sharp, public, irreversible. The security officers stepped closer to her. "Ms. Carraway," one said, "please come with us." Linda's voice came out strained. "This is outrageous. I was enforcing standards." The executive didn't argue. "You were enforcing bias." The words landed quietly and ended the debate. Linda's mouth opened, then closed. She looked around, at the passengers she had tried to recruit into her narrative, searching for validation. She found none, not even sympathy, only distance. She was escorted off the aircraft first. No handcuffs, no shouting, just removal. That was the true collapse. Not drama, but the absence of protection. The executive then spoke to the remaining crew, her tone professional. All documentation, body cam logs, cabin recordings, and passenger reports are being secured. Any staff member with relevant information will be interviewed today. This review will include prior incidents. A junior attendant swallowed, eyes wide. Another crew member stared at the floor, breathing shallowly. The executive turned back to the cabin. "We apologize," she said, "and we will correct what happened." The seatbelt sign clicked off. Passengers began to stand slowly, but the cabin felt different now. People moved with caution, like leaving a room where something sacred had been violated and then restored. As Amani and Amara rose, the man in the gray suit stepped aside to give them space. His voice was quiet, almost ashamed. "I should have said something earlier," he admitted. Amani looked at him calmly. "You can say something next time." He nodded, eyes down. "I will." Another passenger, a woman with trembling hands, whispered, "I'm sorry. I recorded, but I didn't intervene." Amara answered gently, "Truth still matters. Just don't stop there." They walked forward, composed, not victorious, simply steady. At the jet bridge, the executive waited, keeping her voice low for privacy. "I'm Marisol Hargrove," she said, "Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer." Amani nodded. "Thank you for coming." Marisol's expression softened slightly. "We should have prevented it before it happened." That sentence carried everything: admission, responsibility, and the beginning of reform. As they stepped into the terminal, another wave of consequence was already visible. Two more suits approaching, one holding a folder marked urgent, another speaking into a phone with clipped urgency. "Oh, prepare the statement. Yes, today. Full review. Immediate suspension. Audit the last 24 months. System collapse wasn't one person falling. It was the structure reconfiguring around the truth. And for the first time, the twins saw it clearly. Power didn't shout. It corrected. Months later, Gate 12 looked almost the same. Almost same. Glass walls, same rolling suitcases, same boarding chimes drifting through the terminal like distant bells. But Amani felt the difference the moment she stepped onto the polished floor. The airline's new signage stood at the entrance. A bold statement about dignity, safety, and equal service, printed in clean lettering that could not be ignored. Amara walked beside her, quiet as always, their steps in sync. A small crowd moved around them, unaware these two girls had triggered a change that reached far beyond a single flight. No cameras waited, no reporters shouted. That was the point. At the counter, a manager in a charcoal suit recognized them instantly. He didn't stare. He didn't fawn. He offered a respectful nod and stepped out from behind the desk. "Good morning, Miss Cole." "Miss Cole," he said, voice low. "Thank you for coming back." Amani returned the nod. "We're traveling today." "Yes," he replied, "and we're ready." The words were practiced, but his eyes were sincere, like a man who understood that policies were not decorations, they were promises. A framed letter sat on the counter behind him, signed by the airline's CEO. It referenced a settlement agreement reached with council and community leaders, and it outlined measurable reforms: expanded bias training, a new reporting hotline, updated escalation rules, and passenger advocates empowered to intervene. Beside it was a metal plaque with a simple sentence: "Dignity is part of safety." Below the letter, another document bore the title Executive Apology, written in plain language, admitting harm without excuses. Amani read the first lines, then looked away. She didn't need polished language. She needed the new behaviors to be real. Near the gate, an older black man in a worn blazer noticed the twins and offered a smile. "Good to see you back," he said softly. Amani smiled once. "Good to be back." As they waited, a digital screen near the podium displayed a rotating message. Brand accountability is not a slogan. It's a standard. The next slide mentioned reputation management, but it framed it differently than the old corporate spin. It was about trust earned through action, not image polished through silence. Another slide listed specific steps: crew body cam activation during disputes, immediate supervisor escalation, and a passenger rights liaison reachable before anyone's voice had to rise. A flight attendant in a crisp uniform approached, new face, gentle eyes, holding a tablet at her side as if it were a tool, not a weapon. "Welcome," the attendant said, professional. "If there is anything you need, I'm here." Amara studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Thank you." Amani took a slow breath and watched families gather, elders adjust carry-ons, a tired mother soothing a baby. Ordinary life. That was what justice was supposed to protect. When boarding began, the manager stepped back, allowing the process to be normal. No special announcements, no escorted parade, just fairness. As Amani and Amara reached the jet bridge, Amani paused and touched the metal handrail lightly, an unconscious echo of that first day. She looked back once, not at the airline, but at the people moving through the space, and she noticed something. A young attendant helping an elderly woman lift a bag, patient. "Ready?" Amara asked. Amani nodded. "Yes." They walked forward. Inside the cabin, their seats waited. The window held a pale reflection of their faces, calm, steady, unchanged by power. And as the plane prepared to push back, Amani understood the quiet miracle. The system had not been destroyed. It had been quietly corrected, and correction, done right, could feel like peace. Amani and Amara win without performing victory. That is the point of their quiet power. They refuse to become what harmed them. They do not shout, threaten, or chase humiliation in return. Instead, they endure the spotlight, protect each other, and let truth carry the weight. Their strength is disciplined, rooted in patience, observation, and self-control. Even at 12, they practice leadership. They choose restraint when the world expects a spectacle. Linda represents a different kind of power, unexamined privilege protected by habit. She speaks in policy language to hide prejudice, and she counts on silence to keep her safe. Her downfall isn't a single mistake. It's a pattern finally seen. The story doesn't paint her as a monster for drama. It shows how ordinary cruelty becomes institutional when nobody interrupts it. The most important reversal is that the twins never need to prove they are worthy. They only insist on being treated as human. That insistence forces everyone else, crew, passengers, executives, to face what they tolerated. Justice arrives not as revenge, but as correction. Systems retrained, authority redefined, dignity enforced. If this story stirred something in you, call to subscribe and join Dignity Voices. Share where you're watching from and tell us, when have you stayed silent and when did you finally speak? Personally, the faith lesson is simple. God sees what people excuse. Scripture says, "Be still and know that I am God," Psalm 46:10, and "do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good," Romans 12:21. Quiet courage is not weakness, it is trust. And righteousness isn't loud, it's consistent, even when the cabin is watching. Notice, too, how the bystanders change. At first, their quiet protects the wrong person. Later, their quiet becomes listening, and listening becomes responsibility. That arc matters for the viewer. Most of us are not the hero or the villain in real life. We're the seatmate. The story invites a different choice next time. To ask a question, to document with integrity, to stand close to the targeted person, to refuse the comfort of looking away. Grace shows up in what the twins do not do. They don't curse the airline, they don't chase humiliation as payback, and they don't make Linda the center. Consequences still come, but the ending points to healing. That is biblical justice, truth revealed, wrongdoing corrected, and a chance, if someone will take it, to repent and change.